Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our NITRO Studio workshop. Today, we're going to be focusing on using NITRO workflows with teams. And we have our VP of Product Development with us today, James Restivo. And James will go ahead and dive in and show us everything that's new and exciting here. James, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, thanks, Krista. I appreciate that. Yeah, so we're going to be talking today about how Nitro workflows and teams work together to give you processing capabilities to post some cards, maybe post to a Teams channel, create a Teams channel, just some different things that you can do with Nitro workflows that can help you maybe stay in the context of Teams and or at least have your users stay in the context of Teams. One thing I'll point out, we do have a questions box. So if you have any questions during the workshop, go ahead and pop them in there. Chris is going to keep an eye on that for me, and we'll chime in if there's any questions that we need to address. I'm pretty free flowing, so if you have any questions that pop up at any time, even about other topics, with that, we'll just talk about anything. Just pop them in there, and we'll get them addressed. But mainly, I want to focus today on how you build the workflows and how you build those workflows interact with teams, especially with regards to our Nitro Engage bot, that the Teams app, I guess you could call it, where you can see those cards being posted and whatnot. But I'll kind of start out with the two actions that you can build in workflows that don't necessarily require the bot. So there are two actions we have in our workflows, also in custom actions that where you don't need the bot to make them work. So we'll start there just with those two. I'm just going to pull up any old workflow here because I'm just going to show the settings and how that gets configured. Really kind of a straightforward process for these actions. So if you go into your workflow, whether it's, well, this is legacy mode. Let me get to designer mode. Why am I doing the legacy mode? That's silly. All right, let me get to designer mode. Here we go. The designer is so much better. It's so much cooler. Now you see we already have a Teams app, our Teams related workflow in here. So we can even just take a look at this one. So this is the post adaptive card. I'll actually talk about that one in just a little bit. So let me go back over here and show you the list of actions. We have these 3 Teams-based actions that are sending a mail to a Teams channel, creating a Teams channel, and posting an adaptive card. So we're going to talk a lot about this one in just a little bit, but I want to show you these two first because they are useful and can be used whether you have our bot or not. So sending a mail to a Teams channel, you just drag onto your workflow or into your custom action design, and it's got all the obvious settings of what you want to do. Just I'm going to send an email to a Teams channel. And then you have some options here as to where you send that email. So you can select the channel directly because you have in here a list of all your teams and all your channels. So we can't send it to a team, send it to the general channel of a team, but we can't just generically choose the team. We got to choose a channel within that team for the notification, right? So if we pick one of these, let's say Croquet Demo Sites, it has a general channel, just one of them, and it's also got this from address, a kind of specific address related to it, which is kind of interesting. And then you, like any other send action, you want to have it from someone, so you can have it from a particular individual. In this case, I'm going to pick myself. It's one of mine. All right, so I can pick me, put that in there. So now I've got the from, and then of course you also want a mail template. So this mail template is essentially sending an email. It's sending an email to that channel, right? So it's going. If you didn't know you could do that, you can do that. All Teams channels have an email address associated with them. If it doesn't come up automatically here, one way you can go and find that email address is if you come over to your team and say you want to pick one. Specifically, let's just use this general IT help desk channel. And if you click on the ellipsis in the channel, you'll see that there is a get email address option. And that's going to pull up a little thing. Just give it a minute. That's your email address. It's not particularly friendly, so you might want to save it somewhere. But once you have it saved in the workflow, you don't have to worry about that. I guess you could also remove the email address from the context of Teams, so you could kind of disable that functionality of sending an email to that Teams channel. But essentially, you have that capability in your normal email. So if you wanted to even just take this and put it into your Outlook and send an email in, it's going to show that email message as a Teams message, and it looks a little, it looks kind of interesting. I mean, we can do it here, just kind of show you what it looks like. If I get that email address and send it over there. Let me just pull up the Outlook here for this account and just send it over there so you can see what it looks like. So this is what it's going to look like when it comes to the workflow, of course. But this is just kind of showing you what it's going to look, rather than having to create the workflow and run through all that, which can run into problems. I'm just going to show you directly the test email. Here is how an email looks in a Teams channel. All right, so send that in. It's going to come up under posts. And so you'll see that in here eventually. It's going to come up as a post within the general channel. So there it is, just came in, test email. Here's how email looks in Teams channel. So it just gives you the content, gives you the subject line, but that's essentially what it's going to look like coming from our Nitro workflow as well, right? So it's not going to be any different than if it came from Outlook or any other email coming from anywhere else. We're just giving you a way to bake that into an automated process. I'll tell you, we use that internally a lot for notifications when a new deal turns over. There's 5 or 6 people who need to know about it, and so sure, the sales guy knows about it because he got the signed document, but then he has to alert 5 or 6 other people. And so what we do internally, as a matter of fact, is we use this email to a channel, and it notifies that channel, that team, that there is a new deal that has to be worked on. So you can use it in scenarios like that. In an IT ticketing scenario, you could send a notification to in this kind of example we're using here with the general channel under the IT help desk. You could have that email come into that channel and have users take action on it. And of course, it could include links. I could have included a link in that email, and it would come through to Teams as well. So you can do that and have that come in through into that channel, and then someone can click on it and take action on it. And really a good way to notify people, because I know there's kind of a drive away from, maybe not away from email. Like people my age and older are really still heavily embedded in using emails communication. I think younger generations are looking towards Teams and mobile devices as a better method for communication. And so this kind of meets you where your company is at. If you're still using heavily email or some mix of the two, this gives you a chance to kind of like bridge that gap in a sense where you can have emails. You can always use the send mail action in conjunction with this workflow, or you can just send it directly to a Teams channel, right? So we could just send it to the channel and give it the template, whatever template we want to give it, and send it through. We also have the option within this sending an email function so you can directly specify the channel email rather than selecting it via channel. Because say you have that email address on hand, but you don't have the other information. We could just put that email address we just created. I can get rid of all the extra stuff. I don't think I need it. And that could be my email address, and just add that directly to my workflow. Or if you want to dynamically choose the team and the channel, that could work as well, where you're looking at placeholders within your ticket. Let's say you have a whole team dedicated to a category. So in our IT ticketing system, we have categories like hardware problem, hardware request, hardware. Really, those are 2 hardware ones that have email problems, different categories of tickets. And we could have different teams associated with those categories and with the same name. So this gives you an option to send an email to that particular channel or that particular team based on the category of the ticket, right? So it could have this one maybe just directly like IT help desk. I think that 2022 is what we called it over here. Yeah, IT help desk 2022 is the team name, and then we can dynamically choose that the channel. Say we have a bunch of channels, each related to a different category, so we could send a notification that way as well. So that's one way to get information into the Teams environment, is sending an email to that channel. We could also create a channel. So let's say we wanted to create a Teams channel. We have that option. Let's say that could be useful for scenarios where you're creating projects and you want to create a channel for your Teams project. And that has a very kind of similar setup. You just give it well, actually it's a little bit different, but give a name, like create channel. And we got to select which team we want to choose from, so we can directly select it, kind of hard code it into the workflow, or we can make it dynamic using the specify team option, which gives you those placeholder options. And then once we select our team, let's say we use that IT help desk. And so we're going to create a channel. There's two different types of channels you can create in Teams, which are standard channels or private channels. Private channels are going to be invitation only. Standard channels are going to be visible to anyone. Private channels are going to be only visible to those you make it visible to. And then we give it a name. And now, similarly to sending an email to a particular channel, we could create a particular channel based on the category of like an IT ticket, perhaps. So you create that, you kind of set up like this. You got your team, you got your membership type, you got your display name. So it very simply creates a team for you, creates a team for your users to interact with. Probably not used as often as sending emails or this post adaptive card one that we're going to talk about, but I want to make sure I point it out as an option that, kind of another way that Nitro Workflows is interacting with your Nitro Teams, with your Microsoft Teams environment. All right. I wish it was Nitro Teams, actually. That'd be we'd be in a much different position. So then finally, so these two, kind of reiterate, are there for anyone who's using our Nitro help desk with the Teams interface, really for the Office 365 crowd. I don't think we have these options in the on-premises version of the program at this point. But if you're using the Office 365 version of Nitro, you'd have these options, all three of these. And you have all three, but this one really only comes into play if the adaptive card comes into play if you're using the bot, the Nitro Engage app. So I'll show you what that looks like, and I'll kind of walk through the Nitro Engage app in some detail and how you set those things up with the workflows and whatnot. So before we go there, well, let me start here. So we can have very simply a posting an adaptive card. An adaptive card, to kind of set the groundwork for the glossary terms here, the adaptive card is what Teams calls this thing that pops up. Essentially, this isn't really an adaptive card, but you can have other cards that pop up. Like here's one. It's almost like a card, and I'll show you when we go to the Nitro Engage app what it looks like. So I can call a card. Here are some adaptive cards. So I can call a card using a command. And then I can just, I can choose the command I want to use. So I'll show you all this, how this interplays with the Nitro Engage app in just a minute, but this one I'll show you kind of what the adaptive card looks like. And this comes up, let's give it a minute. So it'll come up and it's got an entry form essentially for someone to fill out. Now, this could be an entry form with an action to submit. And I'll show you how to set all that up through the card. Or it could be simply an informational, like here's what was submitted, here's what was just created as far as like a project or like an IT ticket, or again, going back to the scenario I was talking about, when we turn a deal over internally, we have a adaptive card that goes out and notifies, not only sends an email, but also notifies individuals through the Nitro Engage bot to let them know that something new is in the system. But you set that up through this post an adaptive card action in Microsoft Teams. So of course, you give it a name as usual, give it a description if you want. You could delay execution if you wanted to delay it for a few seconds, whatever it is. We pretty much always have just the Nitro Engage bots. There could be other bots you have set up in your scenario, but in this case, we're setting up just the Nitro Engage bot. I just clicked on that I because I want to see what happened there. Nothing. I'll have to check that one. And then who gets it? So instead of sending to a channel, now we're sending to a particular individual. We're sending it to a particular recipient, which may be a field on the form, could be a particular user in a group, could be a field on the form with a column, or it could be a particular email address that we know. We can just directly put that in there. So we can notify someone. If it's part of this kind of adaptive card workflow processing, I'll show you what that looks like. The bot conversation might be the appropriate choice here, and I'll show you. You might want to choose that. Kind of recipient is sort of like when you're invoking that workflow. outside of using the commands in the Nitro Engage app. But bot conversation would come into play if you're using that command structure to invoke the process and then using workflows to continue that process. So leave that as it is for now. Now down here you have the layout. So we've helpfully put the placeholders over here on the right hand side as to show you where this information is going to come up. So you got card title. So problem ticket created is going to be here. Card image is this thing over here. So we could select an image. We could use we could upload our own image. Some public facing URL could be there, or we could use it's kind of a generic user image. It's I think I might have it up over here somewhere. Yeah, just kind of a user image. So it just looks like that. But you could upload your own. Card image size, of course, you have different options. You have large, medium, or small. Where it appears is could be on the right or the left. And then you have the heading. So then you get to the next part, the next placeholder here of the heading, right here. You can have placeholders in there, of course. So if you can see down here in the subheading, which is this bigger one here, we do have a placeholder of the title of the item that was created. So in SharePoint, we have that title field that gets created and that gets added here. You can use placeholders and use some functions around that to transform the data if you wanted to do that. Of course, subtext would be down here. Then you have description, which maps to this place here. You can show different columns of that item. So in your SharePoint item, if you wanted to show, as many columns as you want, you really can. And we have just shown 2 here in this particular card, but you could have as many as you need. And I think that, let me see how many are on this card here. This one has 3, right? So it's going to have the column name and the value from the SharePoint item that you're pulling up. So you can show as many of those cards as you want. Of course, there's probably going to be some reasonable upward limit of how many are really useful for showing on the card, but you could essentially have as many as those columns on that card as you want. And then you could, if you want to, choose to link back to the item in the browser. So we have here a link back to the item in the browser. And you can kind of see that over here. Same idea. I got this click here function to view requests in browser. That's just going to open up SharePoint and take you to this particular list item in SharePoint. So that's all coming from the adaptive card in the context of Teams, right? So you kind of build it up and to show what you want it to show. And then you can even put some actions around it. I'll talk about these actions in just a little bit and I'll get deeper into that. But there's a lot you can do here. It can have different actions, as many actions as you want, which could be, you can see in this particular instance, it's 3 actions for either adding a note, reassigning this ticket, or resolving this ticket in the context of Teams. And that's running, the presentation is in the Teams interface, but the back end of this is Nitro Workflows, essentially. So I'll show you how all that's built right now. So first of all, any questions on building? I don't see any questions on building the adaptive card. And if you have any, feel free to pop them into the questions box. Looks like we do have someone raising their hand from a while back. I don't know, I must have missed it earlier. Let's see, I can unmute you, Jim Reader. Oh, you took your hand down, okay. If you still have a question, I can unmute you and you can ask the question that way as well. All right, here, let me unmute you. See if I can. Hang on a second. All right, I think I just sent you an unmute request. Oh, there you
go. How did you do the Nitro Engage app in Teams? Is that something you have to do through the Nitro? Like, I don't understand how that gets into Teams.
Sure, it's a great question. That's part of this. I usually kind of assume people know or assume people are aware of. So let me go ahead and show you that. So the Nitro Engage is a Teams app and is a separate add-on. And if you're interested in that, let me know. We can talk to the sales team about what that means for your particular engagement. But it is a separate thing from Nitro. It's separate, but it's tightly intertwined with what we're doing with Nitro. But because it's over here in Teams and not in the SharePoint space, it's a little bit different. So it does have to be added separately. And you would add the Nitro Engage app in a similar way that you would add any app through Teams, which you may or may not be aware of how to do that. So let me just kind of show you real quick. There's a place you can load these in here, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but I think there's oh yeah, look at that right there, upload an app. So what we would do is send you a package for that Teams app, and you would get that file, upload it into your Teams, and then you can add it to your bar over here, and you just have to make sure you click to pin it. See, this one's already pinned, so it says unpin, but you can choose to pin it or not. If you don't pin it, that's fine. You'll still see all your apps over here. You can search for it like this. It's got some different engage options over here, but you can always search for it. And you can see over here when you click on apps, you've got apps. We've done a lot of development, different types of apps that we've kind of worked on iterations over the years, so ignore all that crap, but it's basically just this Nitro Engage app that would be in your system, and that's the one that you would interact with. So once you pin it over here, now again, because it's in the Teams client, each person who's interacting with it would have to add it to their Teams bar if they wanted to see it over here on the left-hand side. But to get it in there initially, it should then be available for everyone once you add it into the Teams catalog, basically the Teams app catalog. It'll be there. So that's how it gets there. It's a separate package that's loaded into Teams, uploaded into Teams, and then added on an individual case-by-case basis to everyone's client that wants it. You may be able to push that out via group policy. I'm not super familiar on that front of things, but that's essentially the framework of how it gets in there. Great question. So, first of all, I mean, you create those adaptive cards and just kind of send them through. That's fine. But you might want to just keep the user in the context of Teams to start, right? So if they're in the context of Teams, if they want to go to this Engage app and start interacting with it, we have these things called commands, where you can just type in commands, hit enter, and it's going to bring up a list of commands. Now, how many you see here, this is all dependent on how many bot commands you have set up, how many sites where you have this deployed. It also is dependent on your Active Directory group. So you can control these commands via Active Directory group as far as who sees what. And kind of the way I describe it for folks who are using it with our help desk is that you have a group of commands that are geared for your end users, and then a group of commands that are geared more for your staff. So if you wanted to create that bifurcation of these four commands are for this group and these 4 commands are for that other group, you can certainly do that. So how we do that, before we get to this stage, is through our AI services. If you go to NITRO Studio Apps, go to Bots, it's going to open up this AI services page. And the one you want to focus on here is this configure NITRO Engage commands for the site collection. Now, I'm not going to go into the bot in great detail because that wasn't really the intention of this particular workshop, but just want to show you that you can start off a process from the NITRO Engage app, and it could be a number of different things. There's an invoke workflow command, there's a list view command, there's a knowledge base search, which is kind of geared towards specifically for our help desk. There's different types of search commands. You can see, I think we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different search commands, just different scopes of search, essentially, like searching a list using SharePoint or Nitro, searching a list using SharePoint. There's could be advanced search, pardon me, it could be an FAQ search, which is searching a knowledge base, or you have that knowledge base search, which is specific to our engagement, our help desk engagement. We could also launch a URL from that from that NITRO Engage app. So different things you can do. Each one of these, if you look at each one, invoke workflow is obviously going to invoke a workflow, but if you look at list view command, almost all of them have this need or this requirement of having it being tied back to a workflow. And so that workflow is what we're talking about when we talk about these post-adaptive card workflows. So pretty much any of these commands have to come through, and do something with the workflow side. So it doesn't know what, the processing is really happening from the workflow side, not from the bot side. So the bot is really just invoking a workflow, which can then do other things. And to kind of illustrate that a little bit, I've got this diagram over here. It's a little kind of crazy. But it's kind of shows what I was just talking about, where you have the command, you click on the command, it can present something in the interface, in the Nitro Engage interface. It can present something to you over there, or it could just directly run this post-adaptive card workflow, which is configured over in Nitro workflows. And then once that's run, it could then present a card to the user that they can interact with. And then once they've interacted with that, they could click a button that's going to be one of those actions that I said I was going to talk about, where you could create a list item, update a list item, launch a URL, or invoke a workflow. Actually, either of these, create or updating, can also invoke a workflow. And then that could, in turn, can present a new card for the user, and that in turn could have other actions on it. So it does get a little, kind of like this workflow invokes that workflow, invokes this other workflow. So it is good to lay things out like this, in a sense of, so what you're, when you usually click something, what's happening. Because there really isn't a way to visualize this in the system itself. You kind of have to build this visualization externally to the bot setup itself. But it's helpful to do so, I find, and I think some point in the future, I hope to have something more visual in the context of the Nitro workflow and Nitro Engage app itself. But for now, this is the way you would have to do it: is kind of build it out in a Visio or Excel diagram or a PowerPoint diagram, however you want to do it. So I think that would be helpful to kind of just, so you're logically knowing, when I click this, it goes over here. When I click that, it goes over there. It runs this workflow, it runs that workflow. It gives you good documentation too for how your workflow is running. But that's kind of the idea behind it, is that you have the command, invokes the workflow, the user interacts with it in the Nitro Engage interface, invokes another workflow perhaps, and then presents another card for the user to interact with. So kind of different ways that you can different ways that you can do that, or it can go as far as you want with it. It just be very simple. Like, we have a lot of very simple workflows that are really just if you look at one of, where I have it, I guess I closed it. All right, let me pull it up again. Then if you look at something like the list view workflow, I mean, really all it does is it's going to pull up a list view based on some information you put in here. You can build a query to get that list view, and it's going to display the adaptive card when you click on one of the items, right? So if we view my open tickets, let's come over here, view my open tickets. And then, so when I click on one of these, that's when it's going to invoke that display adaptive card workflow, and which is embedded in that list view web part. Let's see, where is it? Over here. So you display ticket adaptive card. So now it's pulling that open, and it's going to open that up. I hit it twice, so it's pulled up twice. And it's giving you some actions below that, but I could also leave this with no actions, where it's informational, or I could choose to add a note, and that pretty much, once I add the note, it ends the process. Or once I close the ticket, it ends the process. And that's it. But I could also tie an action to those and continue a process going down the line, sort of like almost like a chatbot kind of scenario. So how we get that going? Well, you got your adaptive card at one level, and then you got your actions that you can embed in that adaptive card at the next level, right? So we could create a list item that is. Let me see if I can pull into that particular workflow. As a matter of fact, let me just go into that. Go into, let's see, it was display ticket adaptive card. This one, it's legacy, but that's okay. I'll allow it for this webinar. So you got your one action here of displaying a card. Open that up. And you see here's our actions: adding a note or closing a ticket. And each one of these, now the workflow is optional. If you want to continue the process, you could select another workflow and continue through another adaptive card workflow, but essentially you could just end the process at that point. And so these actions can take a number of different. There's 4 different actions that we have here. There's adding an item, or updating an item, adding an item, invoking a workflow, and launching a URL. So we could, in this case, we're updating a list item, so we're going to update it based on what the user inputs into the work log. So we could also have automated updates, but they could be simply a user input that goes into the work log, goes into the particular work log field. We can make it required. We can give it a default value if we wanted to, and then the user could change it if we gave them the choice to do that. Or we could add a column mapping and not select user input and say, okay, it's going to be based on this other information over here. We can, again, use functions to transform that data if we wanted to, and then update the information in the ticket or the list item. But at the end of it, once this is run, you could invoke that workflow and then create another card and have that user interact with that card. Same with close ticket, same idea. There's no workflow after, it just sort of ends the process. So it could be very simple like that. Do a list view search, the ticket comes up. So the list view search is coming from the bot command over here. So you got that list view search, or not really search, but list view rendering. Click the ticket, it runs this display ticket adaptive card workflow, which then is going to present a card with those 2 actions on it. And then once one of those 2 actions is selected, that's it, the process is over. But you can keep cascading and keep this going as far as you want to go with it. So let me show you some of the other things you can do here. You could just directly invoke another workflow, which could be creating a card, or kind of show you what that looks like with the submit ticket action. Once you present them with the card, like the submit ticket form, you could just then invoke another workflow to submit that ticket, and then something else kicks off because of that. Let me show you what that looks like from the bot side. So we've got this submit help desk ticket. It's calling this new ticket adaptive card. So we run the command. The command then, all the settings of the command are here as far as whether it's allowed, as far as who sees it and where it's pointing to. But then it's going to be pulling that new ticket adaptive card. So coming back over here to that new ticket adaptive card. New ticket adaptive card right here. And then, so what we're doing is we're presenting fields for the user to fill out. See, this card's a little different. We don't have as much information filled out in here because the action is the main piece of it, this create list item. And so when you do a create list item, you can have these all these fields pop open, and you don't necessarily need to fill out any of this other stuff. It might just clutter up the top of your adaptive card, because all these things are optional, right? So all these things can be added to the card or delete, or shown on the card or not. Just don't show them, and that we know it's a create list item action. And then in here, you're basically just here you can present your fields from the ticket form that you want them to submit, or whatever form you want them to fill out. So we're getting that information from the list. We get the column from that list, the SharePoint list. We decide whether we want the user to have an input into it or not. We can decide whether we want to require it or not. And like in some cases, you might want to set a due date. So maybe a due date would not have a user input, but you do have to have it on the card, for the simple fact that if it's not on the card, it doesn't get set in the form unless you have another workflow running on the when the item gets added to the list. Then you have a workflow that runs to set the due date. So you could do that, but then you want to be careful about having too many workflows running on the same item at the same time. But so you could add some function here, say add whatever 5 days to today to be the due date. Use that function here to, there we go. So we have 5 days to today to create that due date. It doesn't have to be required. It's not user input. So we can have that on there, and then that could be calculated automatically. The user will see that that's when the thing is going to be due. So lots of really cool options here for sending cards to users, having them interact with that card, and then submitting items, creating items, updating items, possibly kicking off additional workflows that will then either it could be, it doesn't have to be adaptive card workflow. Of course, it could be another type of workflow that gets invoked and that does something different. So maybe it's how much you want them interacting with teams is kind of up to you in that sense. So you can have them kind of mostly fully engaged with teams where you can just map out your different processes that you want users to do. I find it's more useful to have people do a few things through teams that they might do commonly, like really, really common actions, like closing tickets or just notifying, whatever, is just seeing the details of a ticket and then calling the person, things like that are all part of it. But yeah, there's once you start building your diagram of the command invokes this, which then invokes that, which then invokes this. It is, I'll admit, it's a little tough to keep in your mind unless you go and build that kind of visualization like I was doing with the Visio diagram over here. Admittedly, it's a little tricky, but it does give you the power to do that, and it you can map it out like this, and it makes it a lot easier to update, modify, and of course, if you ever build it and then leave the organization, someone has something to refer back to. Is that how is this built? How is this all structured? And so you got all that there. So it's a useful exercise, whether you have it all straight in your head or not. I think it's a useful exercise to diagram out what you're trying to do throughout pretty much throughout anything, any of the workflows that we're doing. Of course, we gave you the designer interface, which makes it a lot easier to kind of see where things are going. But once you start bringing together, stringing together different workflows and different processes or custom actions, invoking workflows, it gets a little tricky to visualize it. And that is, admittedly something we don't quite have yet in our system, something we are going to be talking about on our roadmap, but that's, that's something down the line. But so in the interim, I encourage something like this, just kind of build it out. This took me a few minutes to build. It wasn't that hard to do it. I did in Visio. You can do something like this in PowerPoint. It's not that tricky. But if you have questions on that, I can certainly help address it because I've done things like that in the past. So that's kind of what I wanted to cover with how you can use the adaptive card to you can use the command to invoke an adaptive card, which then keeps the user in the context of teams to make updates and add items and maybe run some other things. I do see a couple questions here, so let me see if I can get to them. All right, so we got a question: can you send an adaptive card to a specific team user that the user could perform an action? So that's where that bot conversation comes into play. So I'm in the context of myself, obviously, logged in as this administrative account. And so what I'm doing is interacting with this bot, and so it's using me as it knows who I am, and so sending the card to me. I think the question is, if we fire off a process and send an adaptive card to someone else, then they could do that action. I think the answer is yes. I might need to understand a little bit more about what you're trying to accomplish there, make sure that we're doing it the right way. So certainly, once you have the NITRO Engage app, you can send cards and information to really cards to a specific user, and that specific user can then take action. So we've done that for some customers with approval processes where you can come in and fire off an approval process. Someone submits a form either through SharePoint or through email or something. That creates a SharePoint list item which fires off an approval process. But the approver gets the notification in Teams. So we would know who that person is, and specify that person in the adaptive card workflow. Now, how we get that person could be a couple of different ways to do it. I'm just going to pop this open in the designer mode because I just don't like the legacy mode. I'm sorry. We could get that information in a number of different ways. So it could be a whole approval process with an approval, list of approvers. And we could find, oh, okay, thanks for specifying leave approval by manager. Yeah. So what we could do in the adaptive card flow is choose the recipient. So someone submits a leave request, and we know who their we can know who their manager is either through a column on the form. We could add that into the column and use that to notify that particular recipient that they have a leave request to take action on. Then of course the actions could be approve and deny. So they can those could update that leave request to either approved or denied. And then that can then evoke a, that in and of itself might just evoke a workflow, like an item modified workflow that would just send an email to the person and says, hey, it was denied or it was approved or whatever. But again, the manager, let me think about that for a minute. So you get you'd have to know who the person's manager, who that manager is. I think we get that a couple different ways. We could get it through, I might have to get it through, I don't know if we can get it through workflow. And we can get it from a form if we, if we know, if the user selects them, obviously we know who the person logged in is who's submitting a form. We can then read that person's manager, put it on the form, and then we could use it. But if they're submitting a different way, that we just have to talk through how you get that information. But once we have that information of who the manager is, we can use that to send the card to that particular individual to have them approve or deny that leave request. I actually think we have that. If you guys are, if you have NITRO Studio kind of in general, not just an application, you should also now have access to this, depending on your license level. You should now also have access to this leave request application, which that's free, actually. You can just go and install it. So let me go over here to NITRO applications. And then leave request right here. So we could actually use, you could go and get this. I think within the leave request system, we have some bot workflows really similar to what you're talking about. Let me see if I can find a space where that lives. And yeah, leave request. I think this is more recent. Yeah, I think this is pretty close to what we're offering out of the box. Let's see, NITRO administration. So while this is pulling up, hopefully someone pointed out that the bot, deploying the bot, the Engage app, that it's easier to push out through Teams Admin Center through app deployment policy, rather than having users add it directly. Then you assign a subset of users, departments, et cetera, to that policy, I believe. So just kind of a clarification on how we can get it out to multiple users quickly. And this is what I want to look for, workflows. Let's see what we're doing this on. List name, calendar, employees, leave requests. Let's see what this one looks like. Yeah, so here you go. So this guy's very similar thing to what you're just talking about in the questions. So we have a manager field on the form apparently that can pull that in. So that's what we're leveraging here. We got this send mail action. We're sending it to the manager, but it's also looking to see, is NITRO Engage enabled? If it is, it's going to notify the manager when request for approval is sent through. So we actually have that kind of exact scenario you're just talking about set up, but it does rely on that manager being identifiable on the form. There may be other ways to do it, but that's going to be the easiest ways. If we can identify who that manager is on the form directly, we can use that field in our recipient for the card, and see they've got the approve and deny request actions down here, or the email, depending on whether you want to send an email or the card. This one's doing both, so kind of that's what I'm talking about with that bridging the gap of the two possible options. Maybe people are more comfortable with email, maybe more people are more comfortable in Teams. Now you can meet them in both places if you want to. So that's kind of that scenario that you're talking about, Jim. Good. Any other questions or anything else that's coming up that people want to talk about? We got some 15 minutes here. Is there any other questions that you have in mind that you want to ask about, or processes that you're trying to implement that you're not quite just need some help getting over a hurdle? We're happy to get those questions answered and get you what you need. All right, Krista, what do you think?
I think this has been great. Not seeing any other questions coming in right now, but I know I learned a lot today.
Good. Do you have any questions? I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, I've been drinking it in. I think Jim asked some really great questions, and I don't think I have any others to add right now, but this was really, really great. I'm excited about this.
Yeah. No, and just to kind of put a little code on this, we are going to be releasing more interactivity with Teams directly. So this was very focused on how the workflow side of things informs what you can do with Teams and how users can interact with it. But we're going to be just kind of give you a little insight on the roadmap. We're looking into creating a kind of specific to the help desk, but creating a ticket, which really could be a SharePoint list item from Teams. We're going to be conversely looking at a way to start a chat from a SharePoint list item, which in our starting so you could invoke a Teams chat. Those will probably come a little bit outside the Nitro Engage app itself, maybe more general things, maybe more of a Teams app kind of thing. But I did see a hand come up. Let me see, Brian. Let me go ahead and unmute you. Wait, can I do that? Can I unmute you? I don't know if I can. It's not giving me an option to unmute you. Lower, make presenter.
Oh, I think I had to unmute myself.
Oh, there you
I think
go.
you gave me permission to do it, and then I was able to do it. I'm sorry, this may be a very basic question, but this whole process, what exactly is kicking it off? And like, how do you confirm that that's doing it? So I put together a whole flow, and I thought that I was just trying to have it for the submission to the list was kicking off that approval.
Okay.
That was the first wall that I hit. I wasn't sure why it wasn't kicking off. Everything else was green. It was going through. It seemed to be working, but getting the actual kickoff of the flow to work, I just missed that whole part. I know that maybe kind of starting back at the beginning, but
No, you're fine. That's good. So these flows, so if it's a custom action, it's going to kick off when you click the custom action button, or should. And when you're doing a workflow like this, it should be kicking off based on one of these options of item being created, item being modified, deleted, or item you have this kind of created modified async option. If multiple workflows are going on at the same time for that particular SharePoint item, based on date, time in the column. If you're doing, it sounds like you're trying to do it when an item is created, right?
yeah.
Okay. So it could be potentially. Are you using a one of our out of the box applications, or are you using Nitro in general?
Nitro in general.
Yeah. Okay, that's right. You guys are Nitro in general. Okay, because one thing I've seen when people are using our applications, that we have a lot of processing going on when tickets get created. So potentially custom workflows that get added by customers don't always work because there's too much going on at the same time. That may be your scenario. I'm not entirely sure. But if you have too many updates happening at the same time, there's potential that one of those workflows, one of those calls to SharePoint is going to fail. There's throttling that happens. But if you're creating an item in SharePoint and you have a workflow that is supposed to kick off when an item is created in SharePoint, and you don't have a lot of other stuff going on, it should work. I don't know why it wouldn't work. You can create logs if you're running the process and you want to create that log list. You could do that and then add an item and see if it's firing off. Another possibility it just came to mind is that we have these trigger options where if it's kind of preventing infinite workflows here. You may have a setup where it's not going to process if the item is created via workflow or via some other process. Do you think that may be the case?
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking because because I didn't have a custom action setting for it. They're just submitting it to the list. So maybe I need to change that submit button to a custom action for the item being created.
Yeah, that may be the case. I don't know what specifics of what you're trying to do.
Mhm.
I mean, if you're still having trouble with that, just shoot us a note offline and we can maybe pop on and take a look at that one specifically and try to figure
Okay.
out what's happening for you.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, it definitely sounds a little bit outside the outside what should be happening, because item gets created, it should kick off the workflow.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think it's something minor I'm missing. So yeah, if we could talk offline, that'd be great. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sometimes that's all it is. It's really just a little setting here or something. It's just click that button and it all works. Okay, we did have another question come in. Can APIs be accessed? There's an option where request originates there, but we connect to their API to locate the requester's remaining PTO balance. Yeah. So this is kind of more of a general workflow question. This is great though. We have in our workflows the probably best way to do is this Invoke Web Service workflow. So in our system, our APIs are generally based, we don't have any Nitro specific APIs. We're leveraging SharePoint, whatever the SharePoint APIs are. That's what you leverage if you want to create items or update items programmatically. That's the best way to do it, is use the standard SharePoint APIs that are available. But if you're talking about calling another system and using their APIs, which it kind of sounds like you're doing here in this question from Gabriel, we have this Invoke Web Service where you can, you gotta have identify the URL where it's going to be. Of course, I can see we're trying some things here with QuickBooks and whatnot. To get the, call the web service. What's the type of HTTP call that you're trying to do here? And then you should have your head, the headers and authentication. All that information should be coming from the web, the system, the vendor that you're trying to call, essentially. That's how I would do it. Have this whole web service action where you can do all sorts of things. You could also, I'm not sure, and again, this is a little outside my technical depth. I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to maybe answer these questions. But we also do have an invoke Azure function option, and that could invoke an Azure function, which may be able to do something similar to an API, and that's more of a custom build. This can say it's more of like you build the API or you build the web service and call that from this Azure function, or call the Azure function to run that to do whatever you need to do. But we also have this web service for more kind of standard APIs that are out there. Like I was trying to do something with QuickBooks. I went to QuickBooks and got some information. And again, like I said, I'm not super in depth in this, so I kind of got a little bit lost. But people who develop this stuff, would know it in and out. But yeah, this would be your best way. This web service action is there for both workflows and custom actions. So depending on how you want to run that process, you can invoke it from here or from custom actions. Great questions, appreciate it. Those are really great. Yeah, no, I think this is good. If you guys, like I said, if you have anything that pops up offline, certainly send it across. We're happy to get it addressed. Brian, just go ahead and shoot us a note, and we'll take a look at that. What's going on with your particular workflow? Why it might not be firing off, and we'll try to get that resolved. But otherwise, appreciate everyone joining on the call today. It's been great, and I hope you have a good rest of your day and a good holiday season. All right, take care, everyone.